She threw a family dinner just to humiliate me. I didn't know it yet, but that night was her performance, and I was supposed to be the punchline. It was a Friday night. The table was set perfectly, candles lit, a bottle of red wine breathing in the middle. Her family sat around, all fake smiles and polite questions that felt rehearsed. I noticed her phone face down next to her plate, something she never did. It wasn't out of respect. It was strategy. Halfway through dinner, while I was cutting into my steak, she cleared her throat. The room went quiet. Then she said it. "I'm done with this joke of a husband." The silence after that hit harder than her words. Her mother looked shocked, but her sister smirked, like she'd been waiting for this. Everyone stared at me, waiting for a reaction, for me to crumble, to make the moment complete. But I didn't move. Inside, something clicked. I realized this wasn't spontaneous. This had been planned. The perfect stage, the perfect audience, and me, the quiet one, the easy target. She wanted chaos. But I'd spent too long studying the difference between reaction and control. So I set my fork down, leaned back, and let the silence breathe. She expected a fight. Instead, I gave her calm. That's when she started to falter. She said something about being tired of carrying the marriage, her voice a little too loud, a little too shaky. Her father shifted in his chair, uncomfortable. Her sister whispered something and laughed. Then she made her mistake. She said, "You're not even a man anymore." I remember the exact tone, cold, deliberate, meant to cut. And I remember the way her father's expression changed. That's when I knew the tables were about to turn. I smiled, small, controlled. And I said, quietly enough that everyone leaned in to hear, "You know, that's funny. Because I've been keeping something to myself too." Her face froze. I reached for my phone, unlocked it, and placed it on the table. "You said you wanted honesty in front of everyone. Let's have it." Her sister's smile disappeared. Her mother stopped breathing. I opened my messages, and there it was. Screenshots. Late-night conversations that weren't with me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just let the truth glow on the screen between us. When I stood up to leave, the only sound in the room was the slow clink of her wine glass tipping over. She wanted to break me in front of everyone. Instead, I shattered her credibility, without ever raising my voice. The room fell apart the moment I placed my phone on that table. No yelling, no accusations, just the quiet weight of evidence pressing down on every breath. Her sister's smirk vanished first. Her mother stared at the screen like she couldn't process what she was seeing. Her father's jaw clenched, not in anger, in shame. My wife froze, her fork still in her hand. For a second, she tried to hold her composure, but her face betrayed her. She reached for her phone instinctively, then stopped halfway, realizing how that would look. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a dry whisper. "I think we're done here," I said, calm, steady. My tone wasn't revenge, it was finality. I stood, took my jacket, and left my untouched glass of wine on the table. No one moved. No one tried to stop me. As I walked out, I heard her mother start to cry quietly. And behind that, my wife's voice, sharp and desperate, trying to explain, trying to spin a story. But it didn't matter. The truth doesn't need a witness. It just needs silence. I got in my car, drove until the city lights disappeared, and pulled over near a quiet park. The night air felt heavier than usual, but clean. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells. The stillness was strange, not empty, just earned. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of messages. From her family, from numbers I didn't recognize. Some begging me to come talk. Others accusing me of overreacting. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I made coffee, put on my old leather jacket, and went for a drive with no destination. Around noon, I stopped at a small diner outside town. The waitress, maybe in her 40s, noticed I looked tired and said, "Rough night?" I just smiled and said something like that. She poured me extra coffee on the house. It was the first real kindness I'd felt in a long time. By evening, I finally checked my phone again. One message stood out, from her father. Short, simple. "You didn't deserve that. I'm sorry." I read it twice, then locked my phone. Because the truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger belongs to people still hoping for closure. I'd already moved on to something stronger, indifference. The fallout came faster than I expected. By Monday morning, everyone in her circle knew. Not because I said a word, but because truth moves quietly. It doesn't need help spreading. I went to work like nothing happened, kept my head down, stayed focused. But my phone buzzed nonstop. Missed calls, voicemails, texts that shifted from anger to apology and back again. By lunchtime, Mike showed up at my office. He tossed a sandwich on my desk and said, "You made the rounds online." I didn't ask what he meant, but he showed me anyway. Screenshots, shared by someone from that dinner. A short clip of her reaction, the moment she realized she was caught. No sound, just her face twisting under the weight of humiliation. I didn't want to watch, but I did. Once. Then I closed it. "Man, that's brutal," Mike said. "You didn't even say anything." "Didn't have to," I answered. After work, I stopped at Starbucks, grabbed my usual black coffee, and sat outside. It was strange how normal the world looked. People walked past laughing, kids played with their parents, the sky turned gold as the sun dropped. For a long time, I'd been living in her drama like it was the center of the universe. But that night, I realized something. Her chaos was never my story. It was just a place I stayed too long. That evening, she called again. I let it ring, but curiosity got the better of me, and I listened to the voicemail. Her voice cracked halfway through. She said she didn't deserve what happened, that I'd embarrassed her in front of her family, that I'd gone too far. Then, softer, "We can fix this. Please." The words "fix this" echoed in my head. Fix what? The lies? The manipulation? The version of me she'd built to make herself feel bigger? There was no fixing that. Later that night, I sat on my balcony, scrolling through her social media. She hadn't posted since that dinner. The woman who used to broadcast every brunch, every perfect couple photo, was suddenly silent. And silence, I knew, was where the truth lived. Mike texted again before midnight. "You good?" "Better than good," I replied. I wasn't celebrating her downfall. That wasn't the point. The point was control, the quiet kind that doesn't scream, doesn't gloat, doesn't need an audience. She built her whole image around appearances. I dismantled it with silence. By the end of that week, her reputation was in free fall. I didn't lift a finger to make it happen. People who used to praise her now whispered behind her back. The truth has a strange way of changing how people look at you. Not instantly, but gradually, like a stain spreading across something white. She called again on Friday night. I didn't answer, but I read the text that followed. "You don't have to hate me." I almost laughed. Hate requires energy. What I felt was nothing at all. That was what scared her most. Saturday morning, Mike and I met for breakfast. The same diner as before, the one with the old jukebox and burnt coffee that somehow tasted right. He told me she'd shown up at his place a few nights ago. Said she wanted to clear the air. He said she looked rough. No makeup, no charm. Just a tired woman who didn't know what to do next. "She asked if you're seeing someone," he said. I shook my head. "No, but she'll assume I am soon enough." He smirked. "Good. Let her." It wasn't about making her jealous. It was about breaking the last illusion she had, that I was still orbiting her. I'd stopped the moment I walked away from that dinner table. A few days later, I ran into her by chance. Grocery store of all places. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. The kind of person who once filled every room, but now struggled to find space in it. When she saw me, she froze. I nodded politely, said nothing, kept walking. Minutes later, she caught up near the parking lot. She asked if we could talk, her voice shaking slightly. I told her I didn't see the point. She said, "You can't just erase me like this." I looked at her and said quietly, "I didn't erase you. You did that yourself." Her eyes welled up, but I didn't stay to see the tears fall. I got in my car and drove off, watching her fade in the rearview mirror. That night, I got a message from an unknown number, one of her friends, probably. "She's not doing well," it said. "You broke her." I stared at that message for a long time before deleting it. I didn't break her. I just stopped holding together the image she built. And when I let go, everything she'd been pretending to be finally collapsed. After that day in the parking lot, she went quiet. No calls, no messages, no attempts to explain herself. It was strange at first. The silence felt almost too calm, like the pause before another storm. But the storm never came. Instead, I started to hear her name through whispers, co-workers of hers, mutual friends, people who suddenly remembered to check in with me. They never said it outright, but the message was clear. She was falling apart. One night, Mike came over with a six-pack and said, "You're not going to believe this." He handed me his phone. There it was, a screenshot of her social media post. A long caption about healing, about being betrayed by the person she loved most. The irony was enough to make me smile. The post had likes and comments full of sympathy, people telling her how strong she was. Strength. That was her favorite illusion. She's spinning it, Mike said, trying to play the victim. I took a sip of my beer. Let her. Lies always have a short shelf life. He stared at me for a second, then laughed quietly. You're really not angry? No, I said, because the truth doesn't need me to defend it. A week later, I ran into her father again, this time at a gas station. He looked older, heavier, like the last few months had drained him. He asked if I was doing okay, said the family didn't know what to believe anymore. Then he said something that stuck with me. Whatever happened that night, you handled it better than most men would have. I told him it wasn't about handling it. It was about ending it the right way, quietly. After that, I stopped thinking about her altogether. My days found rhythm again. Work, gym, early mornings, peace. But one evening, out of nowhere, I got an email. The subject line was blank. Inside, a single sentence. I wish I'd listened instead of performing. No name, but I didn't need one. It was her. The same woman who used to talk over every silence had finally learned how to speak quietly. I didn't reply. That night, I sat on the balcony, watching the city lights blink against the dark. For the first time, I realized something important. She had tried to humiliate me in front of everyone, but she ended up exposing herself instead, not through what I revealed, but through how I responded. I didn't destroy her reputation. I just stopped protecting it. After that email, everything about her silence felt different. It wasn't the kind that comes from pride. It was the kind that follows defeat. I didn't reply, but for the first time, I realized she wasn't trying to provoke me anymore. She was trying to be understood. It didn't change anything, but it said everything. A few days later, I ran into one of her friends at the gym. She looked uncomfortable, like she'd been waiting for the right moment to say something, but hated that she had to. She's not doing great, she said finally. She doesn't talk to anyone anymore. She quit her job last week. I just nodded. I wasn't sure if it was pity or detachment I felt. Maybe both. That night, I thought about how everything had come full circle. She started by chasing attention, validation, admiration, all the things that vanish the moment you stop feeding them. I used to think strength was about reacting, about fighting back, about proving my worth. But strength wasn't in the confrontation. It was in the quiet choice to walk away and never look back. Mike came by later with a bottle of whiskey. He said, "You know, I think she's finally realizing what she lost." I asked, "Do you think that matters?" He shrugged. "Maybe not to you. But to her, it's all that's left." We sat in silence for a while, the kind that felt heavy but clean. Then he said something I didn't expect. "You didn't just walk away from her, man. You walked away from the version of yourself that needed her." He was right. A few weeks passed before I heard her name again. My phone buzzed one morning. Another text, short and desperate. "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time before typing just one word. No. I didn't send it. I didn't have to. The act of writing it was enough. I locked my phone, got dressed, and went out for a run. The air was cold, sharp, almost electric. Every breath reminded me of how far I'd come from that night at the dinner table, from the man who used to tolerate, to the man who now walked away with peace. As the sun rose over the skyline, I realized something simple but absolute. I hadn't punished her. I'd just given her exactly what she said she wanted, a life without me. And now, she finally knew what that really meant. A few months passed, and life found its rhythm again. Not peace, something stronger than peace. Control. My mornings were structured, my thoughts sharper, and the silence I once feared had turned into a weapon. The chaos that used to orbit around her was gone, replaced by something she'd never understand, stability. But peace never lasts when someone still lives in the past. One afternoon, as I was leaving the gym, I saw her waiting by my car. It took me a second to recognize her. The woman standing there wasn't the same one who once owned every room she entered. She looked fragile, her posture uncertain, her expression caught between guilt and pride. "I've been trying to reach you," she said. I didn't answer. She kept talking, her words tumbling over each other. She said she wasn't sleeping, that her friends had all turned on her, that she'd lost everything she thought mattered. She said she finally saw how much damage she'd done, how blind she'd been. For a moment, I just listened. Not because I cared about her apology, but because I wanted to see how long it would take before she realized I wasn't giving her what she wanted, a reaction. She searched my face for something, anything. Anger, pain, nostalgia. There was none. Just calm. She said, I never wanted it to end like this. I said, but it did. The simplicity of my answer cut deeper than anything else could have. She blinked, her breath catching, as if she expected me to take her hand, to console her, to undo the silence she'd created. I didn't move. She started to cry quietly, not dramatic tears, but the kind that come when someone finally accepts they've lost the game they started. I could have said more, but I didn't. I just opened my car door and told her, take care of yourself. Her last words followed me as I drove off. You really don't love me anymore, do you? I didn't answer. Because love doesn't disappear, it evolves. And mine had evolved into distance. That night, Mike called again. He asked what happened. I told him. She finally saw the man I became after she broke the one she thought she owned. He was quiet for a moment before saying, then I guess she met the version of you she was never meant to have. I smiled. He was right. She used to say I was too quiet. She never understood. Silence wasn't weakness. It was the sound of me rebuilding myself into someone she could never reach again. After that encounter, she stopped trying to reach me directly. But the world has a strange way of keeping people connected, even when they shouldn't be. Her name started to appear again, not in my messages, but in the background. People mentioning her in passing, stories that reached me through mutual friends, half-truths floating around like smoke that refuses to clear. Apparently, she'd started seeing someone new. The same kind of man she used to compare me to, loud, confident, always performing. The kind that shines bright in public and burns out in private. I didn't think much of it at first, until Mike sent me a photo he'd come across online. Her and this new guy at some rooftop event, smiles too wide, eyes too empty. The caption said everything, starting over. Mike asked if it bothered me. I told him the truth, it didn't. Because starting over doesn't mean starting clean. It just means finding someone new to distract you from what you broke. A few weeks later, she called again. I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail. Her voice was calm this time, steady even. She said she wanted to thank me for teaching her lessons. The irony wasn't lost on me. She still framed everything like it was about growth, about her evolution. I didn't delete the message. I just let it sit there, another piece of evidence that I had moved beyond the version of myself that used to crave her approval. One evening, while walking downtown, I saw her again. She wasn't with the new guy. She was alone, sitting outside a cafe with a cup of untouched coffee and her phone face down on the table. When she saw me, her expression didn't change. Just a faint nod, polite, almost resigned. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't emotional. It was simply over. As I walked past, she looked down, and I realized something that took months to understand. She hadn't lost me when I left that dinner table. She'd lost me long before that. She just didn't notice because she was too busy performing. Later that night, I thought about the irony of it all. She spent so much time chasing admiration, trying to control perception. But in the end, what destroyed her wasn't exposure. It was invisibility. And that's the cruelest truth of all. The opposite of love isn't hate. It's being forgotten by someone who used to see you clearly. It's strange how peace feels unnatural at first. When you've lived too long in chaos, silence can sound like guilt. But with time, it started to feel like clarity. The noise had faded. Her voice, her excuses, her constant need to control the narrative. I thought that was the end of it. But people like her don't vanish quietly. They circle back, not because they love you, but because they can't accept being forgotten. It happened on a Thursday evening. I was at a quiet bar downtown, the kind with dim lights and old music humming low. I was meeting a colleague, a woman from work named Claire. She was smart, grounded, the kind of calm that doesn't need to prove anything. We were mid-conversation when I noticed her, my ex, standing at the bar. She hadn't seen me yet, but when she did, everything about her posture changed. She didn't walk over immediately. She just watched for a while, pretending to scroll through her phone. I could feel her trying to gauge what she'd lost by looking at what I'd become. Claire excused herself for a moment, and that's when my ex made her move. She walked up, all charm and restraint. The same tone she used to use when she wanted to control a room. You look different, she said. I smiled slightly. That's the idea. She glanced toward the table where Claire had been sitting. You've moved on. she said, almost like it was an accusation. I didn't respond. The silence between us stretched, heavy with everything she wished she hadn't said. Then came the mass crack. Was it worth it? She asked quietly. Losing everything, just to prove a point? I looked at her for a moment and said, I didn't lose anything. I just stopped fighting for what wasn't mine. She blinked, her expression twisting between anger and something like regret. Claire returned then, and my ex took that as her cue to leave. She smiled, that practiced, brittle smile, and said, well, I hope she knows what she's getting. I didn't respond. She left before I could, disappearing into the crowd. Later that night, I got a text from an unknown number. It said, you looked happy. I missed that version of you. I deleted it without reading the rest. Because the truth was, she didn't miss me. She missed the control she used to have. And control doesn't survive in silence. It suffocates in it. Weeks passed after that night at the bar. I never saw her again. No calls, no texts, no sudden appearances. Just quiet, the kind that finally felt deserved. The chapter had closed, not with revenge or forgiveness, but with indifference. And that, I learned, was the purest form of closure. Claire and I started spending more time together, not as replacements for something broken, but as two people who had nothing left to prove. She never asked about my past, and I never volunteered it. She saw me as who I was now, not who I used to be. That, in itself, felt like freedom. One afternoon, months later, I was walking through the park near my old neighborhood. The same park I used to go to after that dinner. The one where I first sat alone, wondering how everything had fallen apart. The air smelled the same, but everything else had changed. I wasn't that man anymore. The version of me that begged for understanding had been replaced by someone who no longer needed it. As I passed a bench, I noticed something. A small envelope tucked under a coffee cup. My name was written on it, in her handwriting. I didn't touch it right away. I just stared at it, realizing she must have been here recently. Curiosity won. Inside, a single page. Her words were careful, restrained. She wrote that she'd moved out of town, that she was starting over for real this time. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, just wanted me to know she finally understood what I'd been trying to show her all along. That silence isn't punishment. It's peace. I folded the letter once, put it back on the bench, and left it there. Some things aren't meant to be carried forward. They belong to the past, along with the person you had to become to survive it. When I got home that night, I poured myself a drink, turned off my phone, and stood by the window. The city lights flickered like they had that first night I walked away. But this time, there was no ache in my chest, no unfinished sentence lingering in my head. Just calm. People think strength is about standing your ground. It's not. It's about knowing when to walk away and never look back. She wanted to control the narrative. But I didn't vanish. I just stopped showing up where I was no longer respected.